What's up, everybody? Andrew with NQS Performance Outdoors coming to you from the basement workshop once again. This is going to be video number 4 on how to build your own fishing rod. Hopefully you've liked the series so far. If you have, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit that bell button so you get notified when I upload new videos. In today's session, we are going to talk all about guides, how to install, how to prep, spacing, things of that nature. So let's get right to it. Alright, you guys, so before you purchase your supplies to build your custom rod, the one thing you're going to want to decide is what kind of guide train you intend to run on the rod. There are basically 3 different guide trains you can run. There's a traditional Kona Flight, you could run a Fuji concept style guide train, or you can look at micro guides. The main difference is being if you run a Kona Flight guide train, you're going to run fewer guides. Typically those guides are going to have a much larger diameter, they're going to be a little bit heavier. And there's going to be larger spaces in between your guides. Then the next size down would be a concept layout. Fuji came out with that a number of years ago. They found that there was less line slap and it actually choked the line out and provided better casting distance by going to the smaller, lighter weight guides. And then, of course, there are micro guides. I don't typically favor micro guides, mostly because I live in Wisconsin and ice is a factor when we're fishing in the cold weather in the spring, fall, and into winter. I need a little bigger guide than those micros so that they don't ice up right away on me. I find that the concept just kind of splits the middle of those two, and ultimately the idea behind the guide train is to get the line to bend with the curve of the rod when it's under load. So that's going to lead us into our next topic, which is guide spacing. To me, guide spacing is the most important aspect of building the rod. It's even more important, in my opinion, than aligning your guides. A properly spaced guide that's a couple of degrees out of alignment is still going to perform better than an improperly spaced guide that's perfectly straight. So when it comes to spacing your guides, the best starting point I can recommend for you guys is go to Mudhole's website, and they have guide spacing charts available on there. Those are really good starting points. In fact, you could probably build rods just based off of those guide spacing recommendations, and you're going to get a perfectly fishable rod. Like for me, it's just a starting point. I like to look at those charts, get my guides taped onto the blank, and then what I do is I put the rod under deflection and I take a look. I'm making sure there's no sharp angles or no hard turns in the line. When that rod is under load, I want it to be a smooth curve with the blank. And like I said, those Mudhole charts are a great starting point. Sometimes I find myself tweaking every blank. I don't care if you get 5 blanks that are the same model. Every blank's going to be a little bit different. So it's best just to go ahead and get the guides taped on, put the rod under load, and see what the actual shape of the line looks like with the bend of that rod, and then make your adjustments from there. Get that spacing down where you want it. Mark it with a China marker. Again, when we mark the spacing, you're marking where the ring of the guide lines up on the blank, not the guide foot, so keep that in mind too. When you look at those charts, if it says 42 inches, it's 42 inches from the tip of the rod to the ring of the guide, not 42 inches from the tip of the rod to the foot of the guide. So keep that in mind as well. Spend some time getting your spacing down, and then get your guides prepped for installation. And that's the last thing I want to talk about with you guys too, is prepping the guides out for installation. I've got one here. I'm going to just try to hold it in on the camera, and hopefully you can see it's got paint on it. And then on this side of it, I always rub my finger over and I feel for rough edges. You don't want anything that's going to be rough up against the blank that could potentially cut into the carbon fiber and damage the blank. So what I always do is I take my Dremel tool. If it's a black guide like this painted, I'm going to take a little bit of the paint off. I think that just helps the thread walk up the guide foot easier. And then again, I'm going to smooth out any rough edges on the bottom of this guide down here. So I'm going to flip this camera around. I'm going to do some guide prep, and then I'm going to show you how to install a guide as well. Alright, you guys, I've got my trusty Dremel tool here. I'm going to take a little bit of the paint finish like I talked about off the top side of this guide. Again, that's just going to help the thread walk up the guide foot a little bit better in my opinion. And then I'm just going to knock down that rough edge that I can feel on the bottom side of the guide. And then we're going to go ahead and show you what it looks like, and then we'll go ahead and do the install of this guide. And guys, you can see that I never really hold the guide foot on there for an extended amount of time. I'm always moving it, making sure that I don't get the guide foot too hot or take off any more material than I would like to take off. Alright, so that feels nice and smooth on the bottom side now. I don't have to worry about that cutting into the blank, and I got just a little bit of the finish taken off there. Like I said, I think that the thread just walks up a little bit better. So I'm going to try to flip this camera around, zoom in on it for you underneath the light so you guys can see it a little bit better. Alright, let's give you guys a close-up shot as best as we can with the GoPro anyway of what we've done here is taking the paint away. You can see I didn't get real carried away. I didn't take any of the material, the guide foot itself, away this time. And then I just flipped it over and I smoothed out those rough edges a little bit. Again, you just don't want anything on the bottom side of that guide foot that could potentially cut into the blank and do damage when the rod is under load. So most of the guides nowadays come prepped. They're still going to need a little bit of touching up, but it makes life a whole lot easier than when you get a guide that's not prepped and you got to grind the feet down and all that good stuff. So buy a good quality guide that's pre-prepped, and it's going to save you some time, but then go ahead and make sure you're still touching up on those guides, making sure that everything is ready to go so you can have a nice clean install. Let's get this thing put on here. Alright, you guys, I went ahead and set everything up for the guide off camera. You can see here I like to use the surgical tubing that's available through Mudhole to hold the guides onto the blank. Some guys use tape. I find the surgical tubing will be a little bit easier to use personally, so that's the way I like to do it. I do have this thing set up to do a trim band. I've got a whole video about trim band out there, so if you want to, feel free to check out the trim band video. But I'm going to get this guide started just like any other. But if you're new to it, I wrap around twice, cross the line over, and then I just start wrapping. And then take your time, guys. Make sure you don't have any big gaps. You can always come back and correct some of them later with the burnishing tool. I like to keep it as clean as I can from the get-go. Try to keep my hands out from that camera as much as I can too. But yeah, just take your time. I wrap by hand. Takes a little longer. I don't build enough rods to ever justify owning a power wrapper, unfortunately. As fun as it would be, it's just not an expense I could justify for the small amount of rods that I build in my shop. Trim that off of there, and we'll just keep on wrapping. You'll see that once I get to the guide foot, it's going to make that transition nice and smooth right up the foot because I took that paint off. Got a small gap there. And again, I'm always packing my thread in there, making certain I don't have any huge gaps. Again, if you have smaller gaps, don't get too worried about it. You can take care of those with the burnishing tool at the end of the process. That's starting to come up the guide foot really nice and smooth now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw my line pull in. And again, as I said in my trim band video, I just use old pieces of braided fishing line. I don't pay money for line pulls when I've got stuff lying around the house that works just as well. You certainly can buy the line pulls through Mudhole or Get Bit Outdoors, whichever vendor you prefer to use. But again, I find braided fishing line to be the most effective. You could even use old pieces of thread, you know, trim pieces of thread that you've got laying around. You just want to be careful there that you don't pull too hard and actually break the thread off. I've done that in the past and had to redo my entire guide wrap because I had a piece of thread hung up underneath it. You don't usually have to worry about that. This is just 10-pound braid from one of my spinning reels. And I'm far enough up the guide now I can confidently grab my little snips here. Set that in there next to the guide. Cut that tubing away, get that out of the way, and we'll finish wrapping this guide. Again, ever so often I'm just going to be packing my thread in there, trying to eliminate as many gaps as I can. And when I get towards the end of the guide foot, I slow down. I always want to make sure that I don't go too far up. I like to just stop before it starts going up away from the blank. The reason for that is when we put finish on later, if your thread goes too far up, it's going to follow the thread up, and then you're going to get that big nasty ball of finish back in behind your guide foot. Again, it doesn't affect the performance necessarily. It just doesn't look as clean as you might like it to look. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to put my finger on there, pull a little bit of slack, snip that off, come through the loop on the guide pull, you can hear my dog walking around behind me. She might peek her head in here in just a minute. And this is where you're going to make a decision, guys. You can go ahead and pull this all the way through right from the start, or you can do what I do and just snug it up like that. And now I'm going to go ahead and trim that off and then finish pulling through. And you can see I don't have any little tag ends sticking out of there, no fuzzies sticking out that are going to affect the finish of the rod. Again, that's completely up to you. You'll see it done. If you watch 20 different rod building videos, you'll probably see 20 different methods. That's a great thing about rod building though, you guys. You can figure out what works for you. You can develop your own techniques. None of them are wrong, as long as they work for you and they're effective, you know. There's no set rules as to how you have to go about this. I'm going to go ahead and take care of this trim band really quick. Again, I've got an entire video about setting these trim bands up, but this is just how I like to do it. Again, there's several methods out there that I've seen different guys use. For me, this is the one that works, and so that's what I stick with. You know, once you find a technique that works for you, don't worry about anybody saying it's wrong or it's right. If it works for you, it's right. All right, we're going to start this trim band over here. I just tried to get a little cute and flip it away from me so that you guys could possibly see it better on camera, and I goofed it up, so I'm going to start over. We're going to go 5 complete trips around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the 6th one, we're going to come through and finish this off. Again, I'm going to try and spin this around a little bit so you can see it a little bit better, hopefully, and not goof it up like I did on the last one. Coming through my loop there, hopefully that's showing up. It's a lot of extra pressure to do this stuff on camera, you guys. And again, I'm just going to ease this on back, and I've got it secured, so I'm going to hold it up to the camera. Hopefully you guys can see where I'm at here. I'm not going to pull that all the way through. At this point, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to trim it off, and then I'm going to go finish pulling that through, and then I don't have any tag ends to deal with. I have no fuzzies that I got to worry about affecting my finish. I'm going to go ahead and pack this in with my fingers, straighten everything out. Everything looks pretty good there. And then I'm just going to go ahead and hit it with my burnishing tool a little bit. That's going to flatten out the thread. And it's also, if I've got any small gaps, it's going to take care of those. It's going to help hide some of that blemish if there are small gaps. It flattens the thread out really nice, you guys. So take a little bit of time. You don't have to push overly hard. Just burnish them out real nice. And hopefully you can see we're relatively gap free there, and that's a guide that's ready for finish. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for guide installation. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and you were able to pick up some new information, some tips and tricks that are going to help you in your rod building. If you're enjoying this series, please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell button so you get notified when we upload new videos. We'll see you next time when we tackle putting the finishing touches on this rod and getting it ready for the water. Till next time, tight lines everybody.